Thank you all for coming. Coming up after Montevideo, we're headed to Buenos Aires and then onward, hopefully, to the Falklands. And I'll explain that hopefully in a minute. Argentina is a little less than 30% of the size of the U.S., eighth largest country in the world, has a coastline of 4,989 kilometers or 3,100 miles of coastline. So it is a big, long country, has a population of 43 million with a mean age of 31. 98% are literate, 97% are white, 92% are nominally Roman Catholic, with only about 20% actually practicing. It's a republic since 1983. It has been democratic with universal suffrage. The beginning of 2001, it was in serious financial difficulty. Difficulties were exacerbated by the international financial problems. Unemployment's about 7.3%. Main segments of the economy are agriculture, industry, oil, and gas. Now, all of these countries, as you noticed when we left Trinidad, and all these countries that have great oil reserves, that's wonderfol. But when the price of oil plummets, they have less income than maybe what they were anticipating. 1502, Amerigo Vespucci becomes the first cruise passenger to visit Argentina. 1536, Buenos Aires is founded, but 5 years later they abandoned the settlement. During the second half of the 16th century, there were several attempts to recolonize by Paraguay. Spain, who had been there originally, was really more interested in riches coming from Bolivia and Peru than they were interested in Argentina. 1580, Buenos Aires is refounded by the Spanish, and by 1776 becomes the capital of the Viceroy of Rio de Janeiro, of Rio de Plata. 1806 and 1807, the British invaded, but they're repelled by the Spanish, and that perhaps sets the stage for continued feelings of distrust and hostility between the two countries. By the 1800s, Bolivar had led much of Latin America to independence from Spain, but for Argentina, the result was really a 50-year struggle for independence and national unity. The late 19th century, Argentina experienced a massive wave of European immigration, second only to the U.S., and that led to a whole reinvention of society. By 1908, Argentina was the seventh wealthiest country in the whole world. Now, one of the most famous and best-known leaders of the confused and confusing history of Argentina was Juan Domingo Perón. He was a military officer, politician, 3 times was elected president of Argentina, and he is a man who many would say was also a dictator. 42 years later, he is still a controversial figure, and there's a party today in Argentina that is led by his followers, who are called Peronistas. His fame and popularity, however, was eclipsed by that of his immensely popular second wife, Eva Duarte, popularly known as Evita. And both worked to eliminate poverty, to dignify labor, and at times found themselves opposed by both the right and the left. Maria Eva Duarte de Perón, usually just referred to as Eva Perón, or by her affectionate nickname Evita, was born in a rural village in 1919. At the age of 15, she comes to Buenos Aires. She wants to pursue a career as a stage, radio, and film actress. She meets Colonel Juan Perón at a charity event. The two fall in love, and they are married in 1944. Perón was elected president of Argentina in 1946. Eva became an advocate for labor and women's rights. She founded the first large-scale female political party, and then ran for vice president. Opposition from the military and powerful families and her declining health forced her to withdraw shortly from the candidacy for the vice presidency, and shortly thereafter, she died. The cemetery in Buenos Aires is really well worth visiting. It's located in an exclusive Buenos Aires neighborhood. It's a virtual city unto itself. It contains about 6,400 really outstanding, architecturally diverse mausoleums. And the one tomb that all the tourists flock to in Recoleta Cemetery is, of course, the crypt of the family Duarte. Now, Eva Perón died of cancer in 1952. When she died, most of Buenos Aires turned out for her elaborate funeral procession. Now, this is the tomb of the Duarte family in Recoleta Cemetery, where people make their pilgrimage to the tomb of Eva Perón. There was only one problem. For many years, Eva was not in her tomb. It took 24 years for Eva to get back and get laid to rest finally in the family tomb. Following her death, fearing that either her supporters or the enemies of Perón would spirit her body away, she was taken and kept in a secret location, her body, that is. 3 years later, with the assistance of the Vatican, her body was taken to Milan, Italy, and buried there under a false name. 1971, her body was exhumed, doctored up, reconstructed, and flown to Spain, where it was on display in the home of Perón and his then current living wife until Perón's death. Now, just what you'd want in a glass-topped coffee table in the living room. Your husband's former wife. But that's how it was until he finally died. But in 1973, Juan Perón and his new wife, Isabel, then returned to Argentina. Juan Perón was elected president. His wife was elected vice president. When he died suddenly the following year, his wife, Isabel, took over as president, and she oversaw the repatriation of Evita's body from Madrid to Argentina. So in 1976, Eva Perón was finally laid to rest in the family tomb. She's buried 5 meters underground in a crypt fortified like a nuclear bunker so that no one would ever again disturb the remains of Argentina's most famous First Lady. Her real memory has pretty much in our day been eclipsed by the musical Evita by Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber, which is loosely based on the life of Eva Duarte de Perón. The musical began as a rock opera in 1976, hit the stage in London in 1978, and the image of Evita singing "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina" has really become the enduring cultural icon of Argentina outside of the country. For many years, "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina" and other Andrew Lloyd Webber show tunes were standard fare on cruise lines. You couldn't get through a cruise like this without at least one performance where the gal came out and sang "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina." But copyright and licensing considerations and fees have made it cheaper for cruise lines to manufacture their own shows. And if they do incorporate something from Andrew Lloyd Webber, it's just a snippet, but it comes under the fair use terms, and they don't have to pay royalties on it. So the 20th century Argentina was chaotic at best, a really sad story of depression, corruption, dictators, coups, strongmen, Marxist revolutionaries, assassinations, and military rule. It doesn't get any worse than this, guys. The Dirty War, as it's called, was a state-sponsored terrorism against its citizenry from roughly 1969 to 1983, during which military and security forces and right-wing death squads hunted down and killed left-wing guerrillas, political dissidents, and anyone who believed to be associated with socialism. 7,158 to 30,000 left-wing activists, militants, unionists, students, journalists, Marxists, and followers of Perón's ideas were hunted down and either imprisoned, exiled, or shot. So ironically, the financial partner to this reign of state-sponsored terrorism and death was the CIA under CIA Director H.W. Bush. The U.S., convinced that a red tide of communism would sweep the world because of Castro's rebellion, thought it was in the best interest of the U.S. to fight the spread of communism by propping up South American dictators and military governments. Now, the details of this sordid history have all come to light through the Argentinian National Commission on the Disappearance of Persons and the U.S. Freedom of Information request. Those original documents on the U.S. side are now all available online through the National Security Archives. Makes for dismal reading, but you can see them there. This operation was hatched at what was called the School of the Americas, which the U.S. operated in the Panama Canal Zone. It counted among its alumni a number of Latin American dictators, including Manuel Noriega. Manuel Noriega actually worked, we'll talk about this when we get to Panama, but Manuel Noriega actually worked for the CIA. During part of that time, he was being paid by the U.S. more than the U.S. was paying the President of the United States at the time. So go figure. So Argentina started this century really in chaos. It had lost the war in the Falklands. The economy was in free fall, massive debt, belt-tightening inflation, and riots. And under the presidency of Nestor Kirchner, followed by his wife, Christian Fernandez, the Argentina began to push forward. Now, last November, there was a big, hotly contested election. It went into a runoff vote. And in the runoff vote, Mauricio Macri was elected. Macri has promised easing of restrictions on imports and dollar transactions, liberalizing the economy after 12 years of rule by the Peronista government. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. But Argentina has really had a very tumultuous and, in many cases, unfortunate history. Argentina is known for its tradition of gauchos. A gaucho is just the equivalent of what in North America we would call a cowboy. They were the workers on estancias who herded the cattle year-round, and for their food they went out and hunted. And for the most part, they were vagabonds who owned really only what they could carry on horseback. They were exceptional horsemen, and in both Argentina and Uruguay, they've become kind of nationalistic, renowned in legends and folklore as the national heroes of the country. I hope that you all have the opportunity to experience some of the gaucho traditions and see some of their horsemanship at one of the estancia tours that we offer. Now, we offer some here. There'll be some more when we get around on the other side. But they're really, they're just a fascinating experience. There's one in Uruguay. I think there's another one when we get down to Argentina. I know there's one when we get over to Chile. As I mentioned yesterday, and this is one of the things you'll see, a traditional contest of skill, they hang a wedding ring. A wedding ring is hung on a little string right up from this bar, and then these guys at breakneck speed, full tilt, go charging down right through there, and in their hand they're carrying a pencil. And the idea is that as they go charging through there, they put that pencil through the wedding ring, and it rips off, and then when whoever gets the ring first wins, and then they can give it to the girl, and they get her love and stuff. When I saw this, they kept doing it, and they kept tying. Both of the guys would get the ring and bring it back. And they had to do it about 4 or 5 times before one of them missed. The other game that they play, and this is more gaucho fun and games, one of the guys sits on this rug. He hangs on with one hand, and the guys on the horseback race around at breakneck speed trying to throw them off. And the guy who stays on to the end wins. The guy who flies off has a sore back at best, but it's a funny thing to see, and maybe if you ask, they'll let you try that. I don't know. All that works up an appetite, and the traditional way was they would just cook this stuff over the open fire. They were smart enough not to let me try the ring thing, But some of these are the most gorgeous horses you ever saw. In that opening series of slides, you saw a picture of me with a black horse. Do you ever go someplace and you just have this connection with an animal? It's kind of it happened once with me with a dog in Herculaneum, and this dog just came and laid on my feet, and he wouldn't leave. I think he wanted me to take him home or something. But that black horse, that was, man, if I had a private jet and all the money in the world, I would own that black horse. But anyhow, you'll see some great horses, and it really is a neat opportunity. Since the revolution of May 25th, 1810, that led to Argentine independence, Playa de Mayo has been the political center of Buenos Aires. It's right in front of Casa Rosada, which, like the U.S. White House, is the official residence of the President of Argentina. The Colón Theater is ranked as the third best opera house in the world by National Geographic. It's acoustically considered to be amongst the 5 best concert venues in the whole world. The present Colón was opened in 1908. It replaced an original theater which had opened in 1857. The auditorium is horseshoe-shaped, has 2,487 seats, slightly more than the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, and standing room for an additional 1,000 people. The stage is 20 meters, or about 65 feet wide, and about 15 meters, or 49 feet deep. So it is enormous. They do enormous productions there, and just to go in and see it is really quite a treat. San Telmo is the oldest neighborhood of Buenos Aires. It's colonial buildings, cafes, tango parlors, antique shops, cobblestone streets that are often filled with artists and dancers. If you've been to Barcelona, this is the Buenos Aires equivalent of La Rambla. It's where everybody goes, everybody walks. It's just there's all sorts of things happening, and it's a fascinating place. But of course, where there are lots of tourists and all sorts of things happening, what do you have to watch out for? Pickpockets. Same the world over, and the world over, they strike when you least expect it. When your hands are full with, you just got an ice cream cone that's dripping all over. They're very good at picking out the moment where you're not paying attention and getting in your stuff. So just be aware of that. The market here is a great place to really get the feel of life in Buenos Aires and go around and see all the food. And there's nothing like browsing a flea market, even if you don't want to buy anything. And I've actually found some treasures at these things that have been worth the cost of taking them back home. Since we're lucky enough to spend 2 full days in Buenos Aires, we're going to be there overnight. And if you are a carnivore, I would definitely plan on eating out and enjoying the traditional grilled meats. In Spanish, it's called asado or la parrilla, or just asado, but there are a lot of these traditional restaurants where they grill it right on the fire, and they come out with a big hunk of meat and a big knife and slice it off, and it's all the chicken, meat, sausages, fish, whatever you want to eat, and it's a show, and it's really good food. One of the great joys of South America is really eating, and there's also hearty stews, any of which could be a meal on its own. There's also the empanadas, and this is a Argentinian version of a Cornish pasty, only smaller. And we have a lot of South America, Latin America countries have empanadas, but here they are really, really exceptional. And my favorite is a spinach and cheese empanada, and they have empanada shops, and some of the tours, they'll serve them to you. La Boca district is by far my favorite place in Buenos Aires. This historic neighborhood at the mouth, or boca, of the river originally was the home to poor European immigrants. When they came in poor and without any resources, they would take what they could salvage, the old containers, the metal from the containers, the wood, and they'd cobble together these improvised houses. And then as they became more wealthy, they moved on. But they used all these old shipping containers, and it really is a fascinating place today. It had a very seedy reputation because it was the location of the city's very busy brothels right next to the port. And now all those brothels are brightly painted. Instead of being brothels, they're all souvenir shops. But it's a fascinating place. And this is the home of tango. Although we typically associate tango with the glamour and elegance of high society, women in sleek, glittering evening gowns, men in tuxedos, the Argentine tango actually originated in the town's underbelly in the brothels. And as immigrants from Europe, Africa, and ports unknown streamed into the outskirts of Buenos Aires during the 1880s, many came toward the houses of ill repute. And the tango dance was originated as an acting out of the relationship between the prostitute and her pimp. And the most famous brothel here was actually the brothel that was run and staffed by Jewish immigrants. Today, it's a wonderful place. You'll still find street performers in La Boca like these people in front of an old house of ill repute, dancing the tango, and it's part of what gives Buenos Aires its wonderful flavor. There are tango shows that are specifically designed for cruise passengers who have limited time in port. Since we're going to be there overnight, it might be a good option. You can see some of the highlights of Buenos Aires during the day, but at night you can go see a really nice tango show. This gal at the bottom, her name is Minnie Valero, and she's a wonderful artist that I actually met on a Princess cruise crossing the Atlantic. And she and her husband were both born in Argentina, came to the United States. He was a medical researcher at UCLA. She was a principal of a Los Angeles high school. And she started with watercolors. She's become a very accomplished artist, and she loves the tango heritage of her homeland, loves to paint that. I said I met her on a Princess cruise, and we hit it off. She actually ended up with her husband coming to Panama and house sitting for us, watching our dogs, so that my wife could come on a cruise with me. And they've become good friends. This is Minnie's painting of my dog, Baru, sound asleep, and from the front porch of my house looking out to the driveway. So that's tango. Now, the Tigre Delta, it boasts thousands of islands. It's a vast network of islets, channels, rivers, backwaters, and it's very popular as a weekend retreat for people who live in the city of Buenos Aires. If they want to get away, they want to escape for the weekend. This is the most famous Argentinian of all. Born in Buenos Aires in 1936. He was a scientist, trained as a chemist. Evenings, he worked as a nightclub bouncer before going to seminary. And he was ordained a priest in 1969, joined the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits. He became the Archbishop of Buenos Aires in 1998 and was made a cardinal in 2001 by Pope John Paul II. In keeping with his Jesuit training, he lived a simple lifestyle. He went to work every day taking public transportation, and he was noted in Buenos Aires for his humility, his emphasis on God's mercy, his concern for the poor, and his commitment to interfaith dialogue. Francis might be called the unpope, especially when you compare him to his predecessor, Benedict. From the moment he was chosen, Francis made it very clear that he was his own, God's man, much to the consternation of Vatican bureaucrats. Francis chose not to ride in the papal limo, but on the bus with the rest of the cardinals. He chose not to live in the splendor of the papal apartments, but he lives in the hotel that serves as a hostel for visiting bishops coming to the Vatican, and he eats dinner with them at night rather than having his own service. He's very unlike his predecessor, but nevertheless, Benedict's great contribution, at least in my opinion, was to do away with the old theological concept, which was very important throughout Catholic history up until this point, that the Pope was the ultimate bridge between God and man. And what Benedict did is recognize the Pope as a CEO who can retire, and he did. So now Francis comes along. He's a breath of fresh air, and he is transforming, I think, the Roman Catholic Church. Not everyone in the hierarchy approves of Francis, especially when he goes off script, castigating cardinals for living like princes, although their traditional title is princes of the church, and urging priests to be shepherds with the smell of sheep. I love that phrase, shepherds with the smell of sheep. He's told bishops he elevated to cardinals not to view their elevation as a reward or access to privilege, just job assignments with more responsibilities. And Francis' first words to the cardinals who elected him, which have proven probably quite accurate, was, "God forgive you for what you've done." And they probably are all wondering. But he is the most famous Argentinian of all. Mate is a traditional drink in some countries in South America, especially Lebanon, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Brazil. It's also common in parts of Chile, Lebanon, and Syria. The drink, which contains caffeine, is made by an infusion of dried leaves of the herba mata. It's traditionally served in decorated hollowed-out gourd with a metal sipping straw that has a little strainer on the end to remove the ground-up herba leaves, and you can see that everybody drinks it, including the Pope. So, the Argentinian wine industry is the 5th largest producer of wine in the world. Argentine wine has its roots in Spain, with vine cuttings being brought over to Santiago in 1557. Historically, Argentinian winemakers were more interested in quality than quantity, and they're more interested historically in quantity rather than quality. Whatever, you get the point. And so the country would consume 90% of the wine it produced, about 12 gallons per year per capita. Fortunately, they have gotten beyond that, and they're producing some very good wines right now that are really excellent wines. And where I live in Panama, we get lots of really attractively priced Argentinian and Chilean wine. Also get California wine, about the same cost as in the U.S., and we get wines from Australia. And the wines we get from Australia, I can tell you that you buy them in Panama for less than you pay at the winery in Australia. I don't know how that works, but anyhow, really great wine. Now, the Argentinian peso is worth only about 11 US cents. It uses the same dollar sign as in the US, plus the banknotes changed in 1992. So there are still old, now worthless bills around, as well as a lot of counterfeit bills. And it's hard for a tourist to tell the difference. So be careful, and good luck. And using a foreign credit card in Argentina has an even worse exchange rate than exchanging money. And unfortunately, we will not have Argentine pesos available on board. So good luck. And what I would suggest is when you get off and you go to an actual Bureau of Change and change the money, one of the scams, one of the many tourist scams you need to be aware of, and this can be done anywhere in the world, but they do it a lot here, is you're in a cab, and when it comes time to pay, the driver, somebody is starting to laugh, they know this one. The driver says it's 20 whatever it is, let's say 20. So you hand him a 20 whatever. And like a really great sleight of hand magician, that 20 disappears. In its place, he has a 10. And he holds up the 10 and he said, "No, it's 20. And you say, "But I gave you a 20. He said, "No, you gave me a 10. So what are you going to do? You know? You're confused. You're in a strange country. You have strange money. You don't really understand the language. You just want a nice day. You don't want to fight. You don't want the police. So you give him another 10 and he's happy and you go on your way and you've been screwed. So just be aware of that stuff. It's a challenge. Cruise ships like us will sail up the Rio de Plata into the city. The passenger terminal is about 1/2 mile from the city center. Um, if the ship is docked out like we were the other day, far from the cruise terminal, they will have a shuttle bus that will take you into the cruise terminal. And when you go outside, there are lots of taxis. Many of them will take US dollars, but again, be careful of that, 20, 10. Streets around the port area aren't safe for walking. I've walked them, but I don't recommend it. They say they're not safe. Usually there are free non-Princess shuttles that will take you to various shopping areas. Now, they're not Princess. I don't know the details of those. Some of you encountered that at the Stern and Amsterdam Sour and those kind of places. One strategy is to take one of these free buses to the shopping area, and then when you get to the shopping area, then you get a taxi cab. And that avoids when everybody goes out of the port at once, and there are all these shills trying, they'll open the cab door for you, and then they want a big tip, So you can avoid some of that by doing it that way. But that's up to you. There is a hop-on, hop-off style tourist bus that is available. I believe you can buy a 2-day ticket if you wish, and I think you can just buy these, again, using your credit card, but you'll get screwed on the exchange rate. So, but if you don't mind doing some waiting for the next bus, these can be a good deal, especially if English is not your native language. You may find this option helpful because you can get the commentary of the tour in about a dozen different languages. They do advertise online, at least, a discounted senior rate, but it isn't clear whether this is for all seniors or just local seniors. Often the advertised senior rates in Latin America are for locals and not extranjeros, people from outside. So I don't know, but some of you like that concept, and if you don't mind waiting a little bit, it does 23 different stops, and it might be an option. Now I want to talk about the Falkland Islands, just off Argentina, but not part of Argentina, but a British overseas territory. Now, let me preface this by saying I'm not a historian. There are books written about this. You could do 3 or 4 lectures just about this. It's very important to people from Great Britain. It's very important to Argentine folks. I'm not going to get into all that. We're just going to talk about it as a tourist thing. Now, this is the port I always think of as the big if, because this is the 4th cruise I've been that's supposedly going to the Falkland Islands. First time, the weather was bad. We have to tender, we could not get in, we couldn't go. Second time, we couldn't go because at the time, Argentina said if you went to the Falkland Islands, you cannot visit Argentina. So the cruise line obviously chose Argentina over the Falkland Islands. The next time we tried to go, the Falkland Islands said, look, if you've gone to Argentina, you can't come to the Falkland Islands. So we didn't get to go. So the weather and Lord willing, and if these people don't fight for a couple days, we will go to the Falkland Islands. But it's always been it's been a challenge. So cross your fingers. Let's hope. The Falklands are an archipelago 300 miles or about 400 kilometers east of Argentina, with an area of about 4,700 square miles or about 12,000 square kilometers. The population is a stunning 3,000. Mostly are native-born of British descent. And since it is a British overseas territory, the residents are British citizens and the language is English. The economy is based on fishing, tourism, and raising sheep. And the big cause for the conflict, I believe, is that the rights for oil exploration. The Argentinians contest that, and that, I think, is the big concern for both countries. The only town is Stanley. Almost everybody lives there. It's windy and often rainy, so just be prepared. We're going to anchor out, tender ashore, landing at a tiny little jetty. You guessed it, right in the center of town. There's a small welcome center there that has tourist information, souvenirs, restrooms, and seating. In case you wondered, there are more penguins here than people. And the Falklands are actually home to 5 different species of penguins. The Falklands have 63 species of birds, including 16 endemic. There are marine mammals here, such as the elephant, seal, and fur seals, and the largest albatross colonies on the planet are here in the Falkland Islands. Through the years, the islanders have introduced reindeer, rabbits, foxes, rats, and cats, and almost all of the land is used for grazing sheep. The islands were uninhabited when first visited by the Europeans, and who actually discovered it first is disputed to this day. The first recorded landing was by the English in 1690, but nobody really showed any interest until 1764, when the French settled one island, and then in 1766, the British settled another. Both were unaware of the other's settlement. In 1766, France surrendered its claim to Spain. The British and Spanish settlements coexisted until 1774, when the British withdrew. The Spanish continued with a small garrison until 1811, when they withdrew, leaving just a few gauchos and fishermen. Obviously, it was not considered at that time a prime piece of real estate. In the 1820s, the islands began to be settled by farmers and fishermen, and control and sovereignty issues began and have continued ever since. Scottish settlers arrived, and in 1840, the islands became a crown colony, and Stanley the seat of government. The Falklands are not only a symbolic British outpost, but they did see skirmishes in both world wars. Mid-20th century, Juan Perón asserted that the Argentina had sovereignty over the islands. That heated up the simmering issue, and the dispute continues and intensified during the 1960s. In the 70s, in order to cut budget cost, Thatcher initiated talks with Argentina about transferring sovereignty. But by 1981, the talks had broken down and the dispute escalated. Then in April 1982, Argentina invaded the Falklands, occupied it until June 1982 for a couple months, when Britain retook the islands. 649 Argentine military personnel and 255 British military personnel and 3 Falkland Islanders died during the hostilities. In the aftermath, the UK has expanded its military presence, built a new airfield. There is the continuing problem of 117 minefields containing nearly 20,000 mines. Due to the large number of casualties, attempts to clear the mines ceased in 1983, but resumed in 2009 under a UN treaty obligation. There is now an emphasis on tourism with a nice-looking new website, which doesn't have any information, and plans to establish a free zone. There's been a reestablishment of diplomatic relations, but disputes continue over oil rights, fishing, and sovereignty. Argentina, meanwhile, is dealing with revelations of widespread abuse of their troops by their own military commanders. So it's a sad, sad story. There is a tour bus, I know of one, on the island. There are very few private guides available at the visitor center on the jetty. Both the United Kingdom and Argentina really claim some interest in the Falklands. The UK's position is that it has administered the islands since 1833, that the Falklanders have no desire for change, and that based on the UN Charter, the islanders have the right to self-determination, which in their case is they want to be part of Great Britain. Argentina's position is that it acquired the islands from Spain when it achieved independence in 1816, and that the UK illegally occupied them in 1833. So with a change now of leadership in Argentina, it's hoped that Britain and Argentina can become less combative and work out an accommodation regarding the Falklands. In the past, cruise ships have been used as pawns, with Argentina sometimes refusing to allow cruise ships to call at Argentina ports if they call in the Falklands, and vice versa. So hopefully that stuff is going to be, hopefully the chapter can be closed on all that and they can coexist peacefully together. So coming up, after we leave Buenos Aires, I'm going to be talking about Charles Darwin and the Beagle and the ports that we have coming up as we continue our journey headed around the Horn. So thank you very much for coming, and I apologize to the Brits if I mess up the UK and Brits and the names. I do apologize. Thank you very much, guys.